Good evening and welcome to the Oklahoma City Museum of Art and our Sustainers preview for the Sense of Beauty, 6 Centuries of Painting from Museo de Arte de Ponce. And tonight's lecture, Our Museum is a Dream Come True, Luis Ferré and his collection for Puerto Rico. Before introducing our speaker, please join me in thanking the leading sponsors of this exhibition, Lawrence H. and Ronna C. Davis, Vicky and David Hunt, Lynn and Ernesto Sanchez, Amalia Miranda Silverstein, Visit OKC, Chuck Wiggin, J. Edward Barth, Leslie and Clifford Hudson, Colonel Dean and Mrs. Jeannie Jackson, and the James Cray Mead family. We're also honored to welcome a special guest this evening, the executive director of the Museo de Arte de Ponce, Marcos Montero. Welcome. Their support, together with the partnership of the Museo Arte de Ponce, has made it possible for us to share this extraordinary exhibition with Oklahoma audiences. Thank you. Our speaker this evening, Iraida Rodríguez-Negrón, serves as Chief Curator of the Museo de Arte de Ponce. She has curated numerous exhibitions on subjects ranging from 16th century Italian art to 20th century Puerto Rican art. She has also curated, edited, and authored exhibition catalogues for traveling exhibitions, including The Sense of Beauty. Currently, she is leading the reinstallation of the museum's permanent collection, which is scheduled to reopen in 2028. Please join me and welcome Iraida.
Good evening, everyone. That's good. Thank you, Brian, for the introduction. Before anything, I would like to express my gratitude to the team here at the Oklahoma City Museum of Art, to the president, Michael Anderson, to Jessica Provencher, who was the in-house curator for the exhibition, Maury Ford as well, because he was the first contact person that we spoke to when we were thinking of offering, we offered the exhibition and they received it with open arms. So it's been great working with the team, very positive. So thank you for that collaboration. Also, thank you to the sponsors, and thank you to Marcos for joining me this evening as an ambassador of the museum tonight. One of the main reasons for organizing this exhibition was to highlight not only our collection and to share our treasures during this time when the museum is closed, but also to highlight the role of Luis Ferré, the founder of the museum, and his contribution to culture in Puerto Rico and for creating this museum for the people of Puerto Rico. Has anyone visited the museum in Ponce before? Oh, good. So we have 2 people here at the front. Congratulations. And we invite everyone. Actually, today we not only celebrate the opening of the exhibition, but we got the news that the rebuilding and repairs started exactly today. So that's a great news that we received today. Yes, that merits that merits an applause. The reopening might be early 2029, I see. So make your plans to come and visit us as soon as that happens. The museum, Museo de Arte de Ponce, called because it's located in Ponce, which is the city where our founder was born, which is in the south of the island. Very easy to get there. You get through the mountains, so it's a wonderful trip. And here we see an image of the inside of the museum with the iconic stairs that you're going to see a few times this evening. Here we have an image of Don Luis Ferré when he was young, and also a self-portrait of Miguel Pou y Becerra. And I wanted to bring this quote that actually Luis Ferré, it was published in 2002. He passed away in 2003 at the age of 99. So he was just relating an anecdote of how when he was young, he would actually go and visit the workshop or the studio and the art academy of Miguel Pou. And it was there when he was 16 years old that he learned for the first time about the great masters of European art. And so it was like the first seed of what eventually would become the Museo de Arte de Ponce. So it's always very important for us to highlight the role of Miguel Pou and not only because of that, also because we have one of the most important collections of his work at the museum. But I always love to start my talks with this little anecdote of how supposedly he would gift him magazines of art, of Western art, and he would cut out the images and he would tack them to the walls in his bedroom. So he says that was like my first museum. And to think that he eventually created the Museo de Arte de Ponce, that by that time, it was close to 50 years old. So imagine looking back in your life and being able to celebrate that wonderful achievement. So that was one of the things. Another thing, when it was in the early 1950s, he traveled to Europe with his first wife, Lorencita Ramirez de Arellano, which we have to credit as well, because it was during that trip that they finally decided to create this museum for the people of Puerto Rico. And that's something that we also like to stress, is the fact that he created this collection for the people of Puerto Rico. It's not like in other institutions, for instance, the Isabella Stewart Gardner, which is wonderful, but that was her own personal collection that eventually became a collection for people to visit. No, he collected from the first time because he wanted to bring to our homeland a piece of that beautiful patrimony of European art. And just thinking about Puerto Rico in the 1950s, what was happening, after the first half of the 20th century, many of the industries decayed, like sugar industry, coffee industry, so the economy is not that better now, but at that moment it was a struggle with the industrialization, so many of the people in Puerto Rico were not going to be able to travel to see these treasures, and so it was a task that he imposed on himself, and I think he has succeeded. He's definitely succeeded. So the first work that we have that enters the collection is this work by Jose Campeche Jordan, which is one of our masters of Puerto Rican painting, probably our first real master of Puerto Rican painting, that entered the collection or was purchased in 1953. In 1956, he buys this other painting, this still life by Francisco Lleris Estero, who is a master of Puerto Rican art, 19th century, early 20th century, an artist that I don't know if you know that was friends with the Impressionists in France. Actually, he was the one who introduced Cézanne to Pissarro. So he's definitely a story that has been told a little bit, but needs to be stressed. So from the beginning, obviously, we see that it was important for him to acquire these works of Puerto Rican art. In 1956, the foundation was established, the Luisa Ferré Foundation. So the collecting at that time was specifically for the museum. Also, there was another person that was very important in this story, which is Solomon Bamberg. I don't have a picture of Solomon Bamberg, but it's this Belgian jeweler who had a business in Ponce. He lived in New York, but also in Ponce for cutting jewels and precious stones, and he was a collector. So he was one of the first persons that he approached when he decided that he wanted to create a museum. And it's thanks to him that he made some of his first acquisitions of European art, which are this portrait of Isabella Clara Eugenia, governor of the Spanish Netherlands, the daughter of Philip II, that very famous Spanish king, and also this Giovanni Battista Gauli, one of the masters of the High Baroque, which is a sketch for one of the pendentives in the dome at the Church of Il Gesù in Rome. So it was definitely a very important acquisition that he made at this time. But another thing that we can attribute to Solomon Bamberg is the introduction to Ferré of Julius Held, which you see here on the right side of the photograph. Don Ferré is right in the middle. Julius Held was a specialist in Baroque, Dutch and Flemish art, and Solomon Bamberg gave Ferré, I can help you so far, but here's the phone number of someone who might be able to help you even more. And this was actually the beginning of a collaboration that lasted over 40 years. Actually, we have another picture here of when they acquired the last European Flemish painting that came into the collection in the 1990s, this triptych by the Master of St. Anne. So we have to recognize the value of that advice that he received from Solomon Bamberg and later on Julius Held. As I was saying, he is a specialist Dutch and Flemish, and particularly Rubens, and I'll have a story about that in a little bit. So the first approach that he made to Julius Held was to ask him to evaluate a purchase that he made on his own in May of 1957. He went to New York to Savoy Auction House, and he bid and purchased 22 paintings without doing any research, without seeing the paintings in person. So he really wanted to see if he had made a mistake or not. From those 22 paintings, we still have 8 paintings in the collection. So Held was definitely surprised by what he saw when he went to evaluate the paintings. And one of them, you'll see one of them, but this is actually the response. So Ferré called him and asked him to evaluate the paintings, and he sent this very detailed response where he enumerated the pictures that were of good quality, on good state, conservation state, and we'll see why that's important in a little bit. Those that are problematical because of damage or overclean, and those that were worthless. So to think that from 22 paintings, 8 paintings are still in the collection is wonderful. But Julius Held sometimes wasn't too correct in his value, because this is one of the paintings that came into the collection then, which you will be able to see in the exhibition. It's a beautiful bouguereau, very traditional bouguereau, great condition still up to this day. And this was his evaluation of the painting. A characteristic work, not my personal taste, but in good condition and certainly worth the money, right? But then, speaking of works that he thought would become popular, this is what he said about the bouguereau. I do not count the bouguereau since it appeals only to very shallow minds. Hello. And then later on, in another letter, he talks about the visit of this sterling person, which I still have to identify who he is. And he asked him to put it away because he's going to be shocked by the painting. So what we see here are some fragments of some of the very long correspondence that they exchanged, particularly in those first few decades when the museum was being created. And just to think that between 1959 and 1969, 50% of the paintings that are still part of the collection were acquired. So those first few decades were intensive in the acquisition of paintings and held a great contribution, but not always so perfect, as we see here. But the thing that we know, and I think it's the reason why we have such a wonderful collection, not only of Victorian art, but also Baroque painting as well. Here we have a quote from one of the letters where he says that I want above all pictures of quality, irrespective of their fashion in the market. So it was important for them to buy paintings of quality, and not that they were of the great masters that were valued at that moment, because fashions changed all the time. In fact, during that time, Victorian art was basically worthless to many people, many institutions as well, and we'll learn a little bit more about that in a sec. So I think that's one of the reasons why we were able to acquire, I wasn't even born then, but it's part of it, such a wonderful collection. Like this amazing painting by Luca Giordano, which is the St. Luke painting, the Virgin Mary. And from the letters, we can gather the process. Initially, Held would go and visit the galleries, identify the paintings that he thought would be worth for the museum, like this one, like what he writes, ideally suited to be a central picture for a museum. After that, we see that Ferré would actually do all the negotiatings directly with the gallery, like Held would stay a part of the whole negotiation. And then we would see Held like patting Ferré in the back, like, you did a great job listening to my advice. And actually you see that a lot in the correspondence. So it's, for this one, I love how you have like the whole example of how the process happened, and this was actually one of the first acquisitions, if not the first acquisition of a painting that he recommended. And then for them also, this is another example of how it was important to get paintings of quality irrespective of the author, because we have this painting that came into the collection as an Alonso Sanchez Coelho, but that attribution has been debated throughout the decades. And actually, if you come on Friday, you will be one of the first to see my explanation of why I changed the attribution, as you will see in the exhibition. So hopefully I'll be able to publish that someday soon so we can change it for certain. But obviously a beautiful painting. I cannot guarantee the attribution, but it's a painting of great quality. And then with the letters, you can also have or get a sense of how Ferré, little by little, started gaining confidence of what he was doing, learning how to be a collector, learning how to be a judicious collector. And then obviously we have this beautiful painting by Elizabeth Vigil-Lebrun. Another of the things that evidence this is the fact that he sometimes went against what Held was recommending. Held being a specialist in Dutch and Flemish, he wanted to acquire many Dutch and Flemish paintings, so a point came that Ferré actually told him, it's enough of the Dutch and Flemish, I want to focus on other things, French, like this one, or maybe Spanish art, which also became a very important part of the collection. And here I loved this quote in particular because you can get a sense of how he's making his own judgment and how he reasserts his ideas of how they were going to grow the collection. It's important to get paintings not only in good condition and by good painters, but also that are successful expressions of art. I think that's such a beautiful quote. And also the fact that he's doing making reference to Vermeer's Girl with the Pearl Earring, which obviously is a very famous painting. So it's very good to see how he little by little started acquiring this knowledge. Also, before we go to another topic, I want to address the fact that thanks to these letters, we also get more information about Ingrid Held. Ingrid Held was Julius Held's wife, but she had her own marriage. She was a conservator associated with the New York Historical Society. And all the paintings that were acquired would go to her workshop before for an evaluation, condition report, for treatment if needed, and then they will come to Ponce. And there's this very interesting anecdote of when Don Luis acquired this fabulous painting by Bartolomé Esteban Murillo, one of his Immaculate Conceptions, and it needed some restoration work. But Ferré wanted it at the museum for the celebration of the first anniversary of the institution. The painting was acquired in November 1959, and he wanted it there in January of 1960. But it needed restoration. But Held took this opportunity to actually advise him and give him an introduction to what the importance of conservation was, the fact that it was a work that had to be done slowly, very carefully, that we're not going to be able to do that in time for the celebration. So he understood, and he refrained from insisting of bringing it to Puerto Rico before the restoration. And I think this is basically talking about the seeds, one of the first instances where he understands the importance of having a conservation department, and an in-house conservation department, particularly in the Caribbean, right? So eventually in 1979, the Conservation Center was established in the Museo de Arte de Ponce, so we're very lucky and fortunate to have that. So I think it was definitely because of one of these incidents that happened with this painting. This is when the painting arrived in Ponce. And this is years later, Ferré admiring the painting. And actually we have the painting now is in Italy, at the Museo San Domenico in Forlì, where it's part of a Baroque exhibition, the Great Theater of Ideas, which ends at I think probably next week, if I'm not mistaken. So if you have a chance, if you're in Italy close to Bologna, go there to see the show, which is amazing. So then the museum finally opened in January 3, 1959, in a Spanish colonial building in the center of Ponce. Here we have Luisa Ferré on the left side, and again, Luisa Ferré and Lorencita Ramirez de Arellano, who became the first president of the museum. So she was definitely involved throughout her lifetime in the museum. And actually behind you see one of the paintings that you'll see in the exhibition, the Gainsborough. And here we see some images of the house. When the museum opened in 1959, 71 paintings were presented to the public, among them paintings from Flanders, Netherlands, some American paintings, Italian paintings as well, some British paintings, and also 7 paintings from Puerto Rico. So Puerto Rican painting was essential and important to the museum from the beginning. And he, in one of his letters, he writes to Held how a success the museum was, how up to 200 people visited per day when they opened it. So he was very aware of the impact that this institution was going to create for the people of Puerto Rico. and to the enjoyment and the development of the culture in Puerto Rico. Here we see some of the paintings that were part of that opening exhibition. The Jos Van Cleef, we have two Jos Van Cleef paintings. The Luca Giordano you just saw, one of our most famous paintings, which is David Teniers the Younger, Baroque Flemish painter, The Temptation of St. Anthony, and the Bautista Gauli painting that I just showed you. And then here's some of the Puerto Rican paintings, including the Campechen de Oyer that we saw earlier, another landscape by Oyer, the Ceiba of Ponce, or the cotton silk tree of Ponce, which is currently at the MFA in Boston. So if you have a chance to visit Boston, we have 5 paintings from our collection there until summer of 2028. And another painting by Miguel Pou y Becerra that, as you know, was very instrumental from the beginning. Here we have another image from the interior of that the first institution, the first museum, and you see the installation of the Luca Giordano, the lady with the pink. This is another very important painting by Luca Giordano, The Death of Seneca, that came afterwards into the collection. And there, here we see Ferré sitting next to René Taylor. René Taylor was a specialist of Spanish Golden Age art that Ferré met during a conference in the States that he invited to Puerto Rico to present a conference in the museum, and then he invited to stay in the museum to become the first curator of the museum, and eventually became also the first director of the museum. This is early 1960s, and he was the director until 1980, so a figure that was very instrumental for the development of the collection, particularly Spanish art. Obviously, he valued that, not only because that he was a specialist, he's from Britain, but he was a specialist in Golden Age art. But he also recognized the affinities of the Puerto Rican people with the Spanish cultures and traditions, so that's obviously something that needs to be highlighted. But another thing that René Taylor did was find Flaming June. He was actually the one who found it in one of those European tours that they did during those first few years where they were looking for paintings. And René was on his own when he entered the gallery of Jeremy Mass, who was this gallerist who was, he had imposed himself the task of reviving Victorian art at a moment when not even in England they wanted Victorian art. For instance, and I don't have an image of it, but just so you know, in our collection we have probably what is the most important painting by Edward Burne-Jones, The Sleep of King Arthur. That painting remained at the Tate on loan for 30 years. When the owners decided to sell it in 1963, nobody wanted to buy it. And that's when Ferré went in and bought it. So that's just one of the many instances, particularly when it comes to Victorian art. We have what it's been identified as one of the most important Victorian art collections outside of Britain, 55 objects. So it's something that definitely she's the crown jewel of our Victorian art collection, but you will be able to see some other examples in the exhibition when you have the opportunity to come up. Later on, Ferré, so when René saw it, he definitely recognized immediately that this was a painting that Ferré would like, the quality of the painting, right? The beautiful woman. He had a taste for this images of beautiful women. And he brought Ferré, and they acquired the painting, and then it came to Ponce. But it's very interesting because in the letters that he exchanged with Held, where he would report all the things that they were achieving, he mentions it in passing, like the beautiful Flaming June that was published in the cover of Art News. It had been published in the cover of Art News because they wanted to sell it, but nobody wanted to buy it. In fact, and we'll talk a little bit about it on Friday's lecture, the original frame of the painting was sold before the painting was sold. So when they acquired it, it had, and that was something very important for the Victorian artists, these fabulous frames that they would design. So he had a very commercial frame when it was acquired. And it has a fabulous story, the whole story of the frames. So he only mentions it in passing, although years later he would say that he fell in love at first sight. I don't know if this is elaborating it, because it's a painting that definitely became very popular after that. I have another quote from the letters that I love, that it is from Julius Held, that it hasn't been repeated much often. And he's thanking him for the color image of the Leighton. And he writes, quite a picture, a kind of 19th century variation on the theme of Bernini's Saint Teresa. Obviously, this is a Baroque. I don't know if you know that sculpture of the Ecstasies of Saint Teresa of Avila, that it's in Rome by Gian Lorenzo Bernini. This is a Baroque specialist talking about that. I should bring an image of that. This painting, as I'm sure many of you know, was one of the last submissions by the artist to the summer exhibition at the Royal Academy of Art in 1895. He later passed away in 1896. So it was definitely an important painting here, an image of some of the other submissions that were presented then. Obviously, a fabulous example of the aesthetic movement where the artists were prioritizing form and beauty versus a moralizing image, and that's what basically we see with Flaming June, but we'll talk a little bit about her in a sec. Here, I just wanted to bring you a table just so you get an idea of the growth of the collection in those first 5 years when it was located in this little colonial house in the center of Ponce. So you can actually see how even the Puerto Rican art collection grew exponentially during those years from 6 to 75. Even the Italian collection, as I was saying, one of the most important collections of Italian Baroque in the Americas, and you will see some of those examples upstairs. So they immediately recognized the need for a new building. But before that, I wanted to stress a little bit more about the importance of Puerto Rican art, because yes, we are very well recognized for our European art collection, but Ferré, and this is particularly because his role in the development of art in Puerto Rico, not only bringing these masterpieces for artists to enjoy, but also in supporting local artists, the exhibitions that were presented at the museum, the fact that he acquired art from contemporary artists, that is something that definitely needs to be highlighted. And this is something that can be appreciated from this quote that comes from the speech, the Cultivate the Sense of Beauty, that was presented at the cornerstone laying ceremony for the new building that opened in 1965, where he says, here, culture will be made with universal harmonies, but with Puerto Rican notes. So from the beginning, it was essential to create that harmony. And Ferré, if you don't know, he was a musician as well, a classically trained pianist. So that whole associating art with music is very, very particular to him. So it's something that not only has inspired the show that you're going to enjoy, the Universal Harmonies with Puerto Rican Notes, but also our vision for the museum in the future. In the museum, you can tell the whole story of the history of Puerto Rican art, paintings by Jose Campeche and Francisco Yer. These are two that you will be able to see upstairs. The paintings by Miguel Pou y Becerra, many of them that were donated by his son Jaime. You will meet Jaime upstairs. Also examples of realist Puerto Rican art from the first half of the 20th century. Examples of paintings of Spanish exiles who traveled to Puerto Rico and settled in Puerto Rico and contributed to the development of Puerto Rican painting, like Maquena, Marichal, and Botello. Also, great masters of the 50th generation. Here are the artists that had the opportunity to travel and study in Mexico, in the United States, in Europe, and then come back to Puerto Rico. But during this time, instead of idealizing the scenes of Puerto Rico like the artists did before, they started to depict things more realistic, and we'll see Vitacola in a second. You actually see it upstairs as well. Abstract art from the 1960s. And more contemporary artworks like the portrait of Carlos Irizarry and this work by Rafael Ferré, both of that you will enjoy upstairs. And contemporary artists like these two artists, Enoch Perez and Rogelio Baez Vega. As you can see, these are paintings inspired by our building and are paintings that show us the impact of the museum in the careers of artists even during this time. So initially, very quickly, just even less than 5 years, like in the first few years when the collection was growing so exponentially, they decided that they needed to create a new building for the museum. And here we have the selected architect, which we just found out yesterday when we visited Crystal Bridges, that Edward Earl Stone was born in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Did you know that? So that's a fabulous connection that we learned yesterday. Ferré he looked for the exact perfect architect for the building. He was the person who had designed the original MoMA in New York City, the Kennedy Centers in Washington, D.C., the Embassy of New Delhi, which has a lot of characteristics very similar to it's a work of art in the building, to the building. But he specifically stated that he wanted to create a modernist building, but that would fit into the architecture of Ponce. So that's why we see these beautiful balconies that go all around the second floor. And also there's a hint of classical architecture, like the Greek temples with the rectangular plan and the columns going all around. And at one point, Fernando Checa, who was a very important historian of architecture from Spain, he said that this was the Parthenon of the Caribbean. That's how he described it. Here we see some images of the opening event, so you can see, imagine, how amazing it would have been at that moment, all the people coming into the museum, Lorencita Ramirez de Arellano, the governor of the moment at that time, of the island at that time. Actually, I haven't mentioned because I think Ferré's contribution to Puerto Rico was the establishment of the museum above anything else. And he said it. That was the most important thing he ever did in his life. But it's important to point out that he was the governor of Puerto Rico as well, between 1968 and 1970. So he was someone that was very involved with the people of Puerto Rico, but I think the museum has definitely transcended everything. And here we see him in one of the hexagonal galleries on the second floor. This idea of using the hexagonal galleries was his, because he wanted to incorporate, he was an engineer as well, I haven't mentioned, he was a Renaissance man, definitely, of bringing more light into the galleries, and we see some of the masterpieces of European art, like the Murillo, and Anthony van Dyck, the Guido Reni, that's in Italy as well, and the Saint Jerome by Rivera that you will be able to enjoy upstairs. So here is some images of the museum, and probably in the 80s and 90s. Here is the inside of the museum, the main vestibule of the museum with the iconic stairways that are still there, and the fountain that is not there. Actually, can you imagine a museum with a fountain? I think someone told me that you had an issue with that below the Shihuli water source. Museum, artworks, and water, they don't go together. And there was actually not the only fountain. There was two fountains on both sides of the building. And here we see a picture of the fountains. Another thing that is very important, and I think the museum contributed, is not only spreading the knowledge about the collection, but also spreading the knowledge about Puerto Rican art outside of Puerto Rico. In 1983, they organized an exhibition curated by René Taylor on the works of Francisco Oller, and emphasizing the fact that he was an artist that he had a foot in realist painting, the school of Courbet, but also with the Impressionists, as I mentioned earlier, and an exhibition that traveled to a few museums in the States. Later on, they organized an exhibition in 1988, José Campeche and his time, that actually went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I'm sure you recognize the facade. And I think it's so amazing how you see Campeche here right in the middle between Paul Klee and David Hockney. So he was very valued when he was presented there. A publication that I think it's still one of the top publications on the work of Campeche, which I think needs a little bit of... we need another Campeche exhibition. What do you think about that, Marcos? And then later on, in 2006, this other exhibition was organized of Puerto Rican art that also traveled to the States, but this one in particular had works from our collection, but also from other institutions and private collectors, important for the sharing of knowledge, but not all of them were from the collection. Marimar Benitez and Cheryl Hartop were the curators. And then in 2008, the museum closed for repairs and also for the building of our annex building, that you will see in a little bit. And they organized an exhibition, Cheryl Hartop and Rich Asti, Masterpieces European Painting, that traveled, as you see, to some institutions in the United States and also to Mexico. I cannot deny that in a sense it inspired what we have done with Sense of Beauty, but the big difference is these masterpieces of European art. We expanded to include other, I think it's more representative of what the collection is, but it was a beautiful exhibition. And then we came back to the museum with a new proposal for the installation of the artworks, renovated galleries, no fountain in the center. Here we have no fountains either, some of the galleries of European art, Puerto Rican art, and the annex building that was constructed where we have our administration offices, our conservation center, which is amazing, also our storage areas. And we were very lucky because in 2020, this happened. I don't know if you know that in January 2020, an earthquake hit off the coast, the southern coast of Puerto Rico. I was in San Juan and I felt it. I don't even want to imagine how it was felt in Ponce. So it definitely compromised the stability of the building, although many studies have been done since then, but some things that we will talk later are going to be done to secure it. But you see some of the superficial damage for the buildings. Only 2 works of art were damaged. Here we see one of the sculptures, but thankfully we have a conservation center, so those were fixed immediately. At the moment, what they decided was just to cover the works with glassine, just to prevent any dust falling from the ceiling, but the earth wouldn't stop moving. So they decided to remove over 800 works of art that were in the main galleries. Thank God we had the storage areas. Other areas were habilitated to store the paintings. A team of less than 10 people in less than 2 weeks were able to move everything to the building. So that's something that we need. I wasn't there then, but we need to highlight and celebrate. It wasn't until 2022 that we were able to bring works of art again out for the enjoyment of the people. We habilitated some safe spaces in the annex building. We celebrated Ferré's birthday in 2022 with a selection of European and Puerto Rican painting. These are the hallways in our annex building that have become galleries, and we've made a number of exhibitions, but I specifically love bringing this one's consonances because it was one of the first times that I personally started establishing that dialogue between European and Puerto Rican painting, and it was so successful that definitely motivated what you will see upstairs, universal harmonies with Puerto Rican notes. Celebrating the recent donations that we've received over 150 objects, particularly of Puerto Rican art, that are complementing our collection, and we've been able to present them. And also we established a collaboration with Museo Arte de Puerto Rico, which is in San Juan, and they have very generously given us a space in their museum to present our collection. We've presented 8 exhibitions so far that go from Victorian art to Spanish art, Dutch and Flemish. You see some of our masterpieces of Dutch and Flemish, Italian Cinquecento painting, this beautiful exhibition that was called The Underlying Image, the Imagen Subyacente, where 10 paintings of our collection were presented next to X-rays and infrared images that show what's underneath the surface of the image. More genre paintings from the 19th century. And then we also had the opportunity to organize this exhibition called Nostalgia for My Island that focused on the works of Campeche, Oyer, and the artists from the first half of the 20th century, first done with a collaboration with the National Museum of Puerto Rican Arts in Chicago, but you can see how it traveled to Allentown, Pennsylvania, Rawlings Winter Park, and also to the Museo Arte de Puerto Rico. In this exhibition in particular, we emphasize what I mentioned earlier, these artists that are particularly responding to what happened at the end of the 19th century, which is the change of government from Spain to the United States, and how they felt this need to preserve what they thought was the identity of Puerto Rico, and what are the things, and this is an exhibition that was tailored for the diaspora in the United States, so what are the things that people miss usually when they are far away from home, from their place of birth, their home, their people, and their island, and you see that very often with these works. And then here's some images of the exhibition traveling. And then we come to Sense of Beauty, which it's now on its 4th stop at the Oklahoma City Museum of Art. I want to also credit the team because they decided to present the integral exhibition. This is the first time that you're going to see the 60 works that are part of the exhibition presented as they were intended to be, because it hasn't happened before, so we celebrate that tonight. Yay! So you're going to enjoy what we really wanted to present from the beginning. And here are some images of the presentations in the other institutions. It's been beautiful to see how all the different teams have been able to interpret what we wanted to present to the public and share our collection to the public in their own specific ways. And going back to that quote that I mentioned earlier, because that was the inspiration, Universal Harmonies with Puerto Rican Notes. And that title came straight from the speech, the sense of beauty that is important and essential in everything that we do. We have the image by Ferré in the iconic, top of the iconic stairways, the Museo Arte de Ponce by Inoc Perez, and it's divided in thematic sections. All the titles come straight from the speech. You will see the quotes there specifically in the didactics that are included in the exhibition, religious paintings from the Renaissance up to Puerto Rican art, this beautiful painting by Peter Paul Rubens, like I was mentioning earlier. It was, look how happy he was when he received this painting. From the beginning, they had a list. Even though they wanted works of quality, they had a list of the works that they wanted to acquire. And among them was Rubens, obviously, because Julius Held was a specialist in Rubens. And it's very interesting how there is this letter in June of 1962, a handwritten letter by Held. They usually are typed, telling Ferré, I can't stop thinking about the Rubens that is going to be in auction at Sotheby's on the 27th of June. You need to buy it. And he bought it. So he was very successful, and he actually congratulated him. Like, you can rest on your laurels now that you were able to acquire the Rubens. A painting that is important in its history because it's a commission by Baltasar Moretus, who was the president of the Baltasar Moretus printing press in Belgium, very important in the 17th century. And one of the paintings that was reunited in 2015 when all of them went to the National Gallery in DC. This is the one at the National Gallery, and this is the one at the Planting Moretus, is still there. Campeche, paintings by Campeche. These are all paintings that you're going to enjoy. But I love it how we were being able, and I'll talk a little bit about that on Friday, to identify the person who commissioned the main panel. The central panel is the person that it's also was also depicted by Campeche, and you will see him upstairs. Genre paintings, emphasizing how particularly in the 19th century, this is something that became very popular when artists stopped being guided by the academy and started depicting things of everyday life. And here we have this beautiful, possibly an image of the daughter of Joaquín Sorolla in the garden of his house in Madrid. The Dufino painting, which, as I was saying, very realistic of what was actually happening in Puerto Rico. And we know that particularly we have photographic evidence by Jack Delano of the images of the slums that were created around San Juan when people were transferred from the countryside to the city to find better opportunities that probably sometimes were not there. Landscape painting, I know I'm not even going to talk about it because I know that Michael is going to offer a tour of the development of landscape painting between the works in your collection and our works. But Dutch and Flemish, this beautiful painting by Frederick Edwin Church that you will enjoy. And it's the cover of the catalog. Maquena, Spanish, but you can see the home, the landscape of the people of Puerto Rico. And more contemporary works, 20th century, maybe thinking about the effects of industrialization on the island. Obviously, mangroves is important, essential species for the preserving the coastline. So this is something that is here important. The Francisco de Goya, that was actually the last painting acquired by Luis A. Ferré before he passed away. That was one of the goals, that he wanted to acquire this painting by Goya, among other Spanish painters. You will see our other beauty dressed in orange. And obviously, Flaming June, which is part of the cult of beauty, emphasizing the contact with the ideals of beauty from classical art and in the Renaissance as well. But this is a painting that I always say that we need to do like a psychological study of why she attracts people so much. When I used to teach, I remember I would ask the students, if students that had absolutely no background in art history, if they remembered any images from growing up or a poster in their families. They always talked about the Last Supper because the Last Supper, how many iterations of Leonardo's Last Supper we have? But they always talked about the lady in orange without knowing that she was in Puerto Rico or that the artist was Latin. So this was a characteristic of this painting that was recognized from the beginning. The owner, the first owner of the painting was the owner of the graphic magazine that was an arts journal. And he, as I was saying, the painting was presented in 1895. In 1896, the artist died, and the owner of the journal took advantage of that, and in December of 1896, ordered 500,000 copies of the image. So from the beginning, she was highly reproduced. Even one of the first reviews that was presented in the New York Times in 1895 talked about how it was a beautiful painting, very easy to reproduce. So that's probably one of the reasons why she's everywhere, and she's beautiful as well. And then just brought this example, but I was talking to someone earlier how the editor of Vogue was dressed at the Met Gala, inspired by Flaming June. That just happened a couple months ago. But also we have this very famous cover of the artist Jessica Chastain dressed as Flaming June. And the beautiful Flaming June, you'll see some of the images of our catalog that you can find at the store. This is our image of the building now, and this is the future Museo de Arte de Ponce. So hopefully when you come to visit, as you can see, we have two structures that are being added to each side. The original building remains as it is, but two structures to support any lateral movement that may happen in the future. But so we welcome you. And I wanted to finish my talk today with this quote from, this is a magazine that was published by the museum. This was 1998. And it's Ferré talking about, I should bring it here, but next time. Sharing the beauty of art with my compatriots is one of the greatest satisfactions life has given me. I hope that every visitor who enters the museum feels that what I experience, a sense of peace and harmony, as though they were standing in the entrance hall of paradise. The contemplation of beauty in art stimulates the purest sentiments in human beings, so much so that we might say that beauty is life's very raison d'être. Once you experience the pleasure of beauty, you seek out harmony and understanding in every other manifestation of life. So that's all. Thank you for coming today. Right on time. Now we have a period of questions. If anyone has a question. What did Ferré do for a living? Many things. As I was saying earlier, he was a Renaissance man. He was a classically trained pianist, but he was an industrialist, an engineer. He went to MIT. Actually, he was educated at MIT. And his family had a cement company in Ponce, where they were from. So probably many of the things came from that, the wealth from the cement company. But after that, he even established a newspaper in Ponce that eventually, now it's the most important newspaper in Puerto Rico that was later on run by his son, and after that, his grandchildren. And then eventually, he also became the governor of Puerto Rico. So many hats, and all done very successfully.
Did he establish an endowment for the museum?
There is an endowment for the museum. Obviously, the building of the museum, everything was funded by him from the beginning, all those different by him, and the foundation as well. But yes, that's definitely an endowment for the building. Although, as any other cultural institution and non-profit institution, we depend on other things as well. But yes, definitely, when they established the museum, it was something that was seen for the future, to last forever, and that was one of the tasks that he gave to not only his son and daughter, but also his grandchildren, to continue the museum. That was his most important contribution to the island.
So as an art educator...
If I have to choose one word.
For resilience, and give me more. What was the resilience and what? Okay, let's do this.
One work in the exhibition?
Yeah, one work in the exhibition that speaks to identity, resilience, and self-expression. What would it be and why?
I think you can find that in all of the works. I don't want to take the easy way out, but you can definitely do that with any of the works in the exhibition. It's important not only to practice that handcraft of the work of art and maybe develop and elaborate the talent as well, but also all the knowledge of history and also identity. Imagine, we were talking earlier, of course, people in Puerto Rico, they want to see European art. We feel that we're amazingly privileged to be able to have this collection in Puerto Rico. But it's also important to see ourselves reflected in the collection as well and to value our roots and our culture as well. And they, as you will see in the exhibition, work beautifully together. So I think it's two-way, the task, the manual labor of creating the work of art, but also being able to understand the history, not only of the meaning or the symbols that are presented, but what was the context where the works were created? Because you can think about abstract works, maybe you cannot identify or understand any theme in them, but you can understand the context of why they were created at some point. So I kind of took it's like picking a favorite child.
Well, let's keep going with it, though, because there was a decision in your curatorial plan because of major influences beyond your founder and the consultants. When did Puerto Rican artists become a focus, and what does that look like in the future? Maybe go with that.
I guess, as I was saying earlier, Puerto Rican knows that it was always important from the beginning. Obviously, what makes us special within the context of Puerto Rico is the fact that we have this amazing European art collection, because we have other institutions like Museo Arte Puerto Rico or the Museo de Arte Contemporáneo in San Juan that also have Puerto Rican art. But I think there was this slogan in politics a few decades back, which I don't like repeating because it always takes you to this political party in particular, but it's the best of the two worlds. And that's what Museo de Arte de Ponce can do so beautifully. And I don't think there are many institutions that can do that. So when we made the decision to mix these works in these harmonies, we wanted to present the identity of what Museo de Arte de Ponce is. It's not only masterpieces of European art, it's not only Puerto Rican nostalgia from our island, it's the sense of beauty that you can enjoy with all these manifestations.